Hello and welcome to today's panel conversation in which we will seek to explore the future of design for the higher education sector. Many thanks for joining us. My name is Jack Salabank from Future Places Studio, and it is with great pleasure that I will chair today's conversation on behalf of Make Architects and the UK's Higher Education Design Quality Forum. Today's event launches Make Architects' most recent publication from their Exchange series. The series explores the future of design across a number of different sectors. Issue number 3 is focused on higher education and contains interviews, guest articles, roundtables, alongside some stunning photography and design. You can view the Exchange series by visiting makearchitects.com/media/publications. So, in a post-COVID world, what can we expect to see from our higher education buildings and campuses? How can we make estates work harder in the face of restricted budgets? And what global trends are we beginning to see emerge? To delve into this and more, Make have convened a truly global panel. But before I introduce today's panel, there is an opportunity for you, our audience, to join in today's conversation. So, the panel will last for just under 40 minutes, at which point we will have 20 minutes for an audience Q&A. In order to leave a question for our panel, you can do so using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our very best to get through as many of your questions as we can. Also, we have a live poll running. At the bottom of your screen should be a polling button. No pressure, but if you'd like to answer those questions, please do, and we will share the results at the end of the panel. Okay, so on to today's panel. Quick introductions. First of all, from Australia, I'm delighted to introduce Alex Lawlor. Alex is an architect by profession and is now Executive Director, Estate Planning and Development at the University of Melbourne. Hello, Alex. From Hong Kong, we are joined by Fung, another architect by trade. Suman is the Director of Campus Development at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Hello, Suman.
Hi. Good afternoon from Hong Kong.
And from the UK, we're joined by Julian Robinson, who is Director of Estates at the London School of Economics. Julian is also the former chair of the Higher Education Design Quality Forum. Good morning, Julian.
Good morning from London.
And last but not least, we have David Patterson, who is Education Design Lead at Make Architects. Good morning, David.
Good morning, everyone.
Panel, thank you all very much for joining. I hope you're all well. We will dive straight into questions. Obvious place to start with COVID. First question. First of all, I'm interested to know from your respective universities and campuses, what was the immediate impact of COVID? If we could just kind of have a sort of a brief response to that, but then more relevant to now, what is the current state of play for each of you? And if Julian, if we could kick off with you, that'd be fantastic. I think you're muted at the moment, Julian. There we go.
Right, knew that was going to happen. Right. Yeah, so in 5 words, it's become a ghost town. Until late June, the buildings were locked up with closed notices on the doors. We only had a small skeleton staff deployed to sort of keep them maintained and secure. And the place was deserted and felt, and to be honest, still feels very eerie. We completed a major landscaping scheme and a big piece of public art during lockdown, which looks absolutely amazing. But it really needs the students and staff to bring back the place, bring it back to life. It just feels a bit of an empty vessel at the moment. I mean, over a usual summer, we entertained 10,000 summer school students. This year, all of that got cancelled. We are currently running just one executive master's course on campus, which was meant for 30 and only 6 turned up. Additionally, a normal summer vacation would see large numbers of contractors on site attending to long-term maintenance and capital improvement works in our academic and residential buildings. However, due to the financial uncertainties arising from COVID, at LSE, all but essential health and safety and statutory maintenance works have been undertaken this summer. In common with virtually all other UK HEIs, apart from existing contractual commitments, our capital programme has been suspended for the next year. The good news is that life is slowly beginning to return, and more of my FM staff are being unfurloughed and coming back to sort of deep clean and gradually reopen the buildings. And we are hoping to welcome a full cohort of students on the 21st of September. Lectures will be online, but there will be face-to-face class teaching. But we estimate the staff and student population on campus at any one time will be roughly 50% of what it would have been under normal circumstances. To date, we've received absolutely no advice from central government, and the term starts in a couple of weeks. So rather a depressing pattern, but we've just had to get on with it really, so making up as we go along, but always using a risk management approach as we do that. I've been tasked with leading the LSE's Return to Campus group, which is involved internally replanning all the buildings and teaching spaces, a massive PPE procurement exercise, preparing student and staff codes of conduct, quarantine protocols, rapid shutdown protocols, investigating test, track and trace regimes, hiring additional temporary space adjacent to the campus, providing over 250 more cycle parking spaces, additional shower facilities, down to erecting 2 large marquees to provide additional covered events reception space. So that, in a nutshell, that's where we're at the moment. But I think, as I say, it's really, we are just sort of groping our way towards this sort of apparent new normal. And I don't think there is a sort of any right way to do it. And as I've said, advice from central government is not there at the moment.
Thank you, Julian. It sounds like you're sort of in the process of writing the playbook, possibly for others to follow. Alex, spinning across to Australia, first of all, what state of play look like for you? And also, importantly, are you currently in the middle of lockdown?
Yes, so I'm, the University of Melbourne is in the state of Victoria, which currently has a state of emergency order over it. So we are in stage 4 lockdown, or the Melbourne metropolitan area is in stage 4 lockdown. So we are limited to 5 kilometres from our domicile residence, and you know, 1 hour of exercise and 1 trip to the shops and all that sort of thing. We were in stage 3, and we have continued to service practical teaching and also essential research and research infrastructure. We are at the moment under, we're under 100 cases a day, and that's been the last 3 days. So I don't think anyone's ever watched numbers this much since the lottery. Like, it's just fantastic for us, and anyone who's watching from our sister states is probably laughing their heads off at the moment. But we are now looking at what a return to campus might be. And so, as we were saying before we came onto this broadcast, you know, your example, Julian, is probably one that we'll follow. So make sure you document your mistakes so that we can learn from them and not make them. That would be fantastic. Thank you. And what that has meant is our focus for our team has been a lot more on assisting more of the operational issues around planning for return to campus, the immediate issues around building shutdown and keeping essential services and platforms running. We do have team members seconded into contact tracing work, so completely outside of a property area into that more student-facing service areas. So everyone is kind of pitching in to get us through, and the focus will be on that return to campus. And as you were saying, Julian, so comprehensively, the types of things that we'll be doing as well. It's not easy.
Thank you very much, Alex. Suman, you have a picture of what I presume is your beautiful landscaped campus behind you. Could you give me a sort of a brief overview of what life is like for you guys at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. In Hong Kong, actually, the summer vacation of our school year almost comes to an end. And next Monday, September the 7th, will be the commencement of the new semester. But for Chinese University, we've discussed and planned ahead for resuming face-to-face teaching. But since last month, the cases every day for the COVID-19 suddenly surged to almost 100 cases per day. So a decision has been made that the first semester will remain to use online teaching. So right now I'm on campus. The professor and the working staff has resumed working on campus because the situation is stabilized these days. But for students, we have noticed our overseas students not to arrive Hong Kong till early next year, the semester B. And the colleges and the hostels are not working for the first term. So right now on campus, we have working staff, also some research students and professors looking after their laboratory researches. So most activities, we learned it the hard way. We start changing to online and working from home since the beginning of this year. And in the last couple of months, we start to build up the online way of working off campus. So now we, for the first semester, we'll play safe, and we hope to resume face-to-face aspects on the second semester starting January next year. But in the case of Hong Kong, we have no mandatory lock-off. So namely, we can move around, but most of people are very vigilant and health conscious. So we are almost like 100% on face masks. I mean, once we leave our home or working rooms, even in the working space, we have to wear our masks. And so this is pretty much the situation right now. And we try to, even when we're working, we try to have flexi hours, avoid peak traffic in the MTR, et cetera, a little bit of staggering to lower the risk in the public transport.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Fascinating to hear the similarities that we're all experiencing in our different campuses across the globe. Moving on, I'd like to explore some of the trends which are beginning to emerge in your respective regions, either trends which maybe have been accelerated because of COVID or we're expecting to emerge in response to COVID. With this in mind, Julian, starting with you first, how do you think your estate will adapt and change in the aftermath of COVID?
I think just going to trends, Jack, I mean, I do see a bit of a sort of paradigm shift coming in the London property market with a significant tail off in demand for central London office space. And I think developers and property owners will be looking to convert this into residential accommodation. I mean, essentially the market will adapt. I mean, once social distancing requirements are reduced, universities, I think, will seek to retrench space and avoid expensive long-term lease commitments. In terms of the universities, I think the importance of outside space will have a lot more recognition and will be used more. Despite sort of the vagaries of the British weather, I think we will become, funnily enough, more European in that respect. I think campus identity will actually become even more important. I think universities will be asking themselves, how does the physical campus make you feel? And how can it offer a different and distinct experience from the virtual world? I mean, I don't know about others on this webinar, but I mean, essentially, I'm spending 12 hours a day sometimes just in front of a little sort of rectangular screen, whether it's looking at spreadsheets, writing reports, answering emails, or having meetings. And I do find it very exhausting and very relentless. So I'd like to see the campus as a sort of a refuge or a safe space from the digital world, really providing facilities for greater human interaction and collaboration. So at the LSE, we've talked about creating sort of not a campus, but an academic quarter of the inner city. and a community of scholars. Now, as humans are social animals, I believe that the increased provision of social space with the right feel will become even more important.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Julian. I like this concept of the university as a sort of refuge, a safe space from the digital world. Alex, by all means, feel free to disagree with Julian, but what are the sort of trends that you're seeing emerge or that you think may emerge?
Well, I wouldn't like to be outside on your campus in the London weather on some months, Julian. We're heading into summer, so it's a different story for us. I think that, you know, and getting Julian to go first, like he answers the question so comprehensively. What have I got left to say? But really, just reinforcing what Julian said, the trends that we experience or were experiencing pre-COVID around dwell times on campus, students attending, you know, formats that they don't really like lecture, you know, chalk and talk lectures, and especially the financial pressures on students where a lot of them are potentially working or working part-time. And so their experience of campus was getting shorter and shorter. And so what we need to do now is if people have been at home and experiencing, I guess, the convenience of, and you know, blessing and a curse, it's a convenience to be in your house and in front of the laptop in your gym jams. But you also hanker for that, particularly face-to-face interaction with your teachers or lecturers, and also the peer-to-peer and informal study, which is so important for students. So we know also that students do better if they spend more time on campus, and that's a blend of you know, being, you know, face-to-face learning with lecturers as well as peer-to-peer. So how do we, to your point, Julian, create those spaces that are going to encourage that type of activity in a safe way? The other thing that we've been talking about, and I think it might address one of the questions that's come up in the chat, is around our relationship with the City of Melbourne is very close. We have a lot of joint partnership arrangements, and they're talking about the outside city. So how can we, coming out of lockdown, encourage that outdoor dining, the outdoor experience of the city? And likewise, how does that blend and merge into the campus experience? And what does that mean? For example, have we really thought about the application of technology in our landscape before? Apart from, you know, a few chargeable seats or whatever, we need to think about that in a lot more clever way. How do we actually allow for larger groups of people to be potentially taught outdoors? So, you know, there's a whole range of issues. What kind of cover, you know, are we going to have marquees? Are we going to have semi-permanent structures? What does that all look like? So they're all the things that we're thinking about as the potential next steps.
Absolutely, and an interesting moment to bring Suman in. Suman, obviously, I mentioned at the start that your landscape behind you, your picture behind you is of your campus, obviously a very green campus. Maybe first on that point of Alex, that sort of bringing inside out. This is something that pre-COVID you guys were working very hard on anyway. How do you see that evolving over time?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Thanks. Glad to learn from Alex and Julian about, your very valuable insights. Actually, as an architect and campus planner, I think one beauty about the CUHK campus is it's a suburban campus. And basically, it's almost like a small township on its own. We have some close to 200 buildings within this, almost like a parkland in its own. So when we are, from our perspective, actually, at the time of COVID-19, when we come back to work in campus, actually it's not too bad because the environment, the density, and the beautiful landscape of the campus is a buffer, a safety buffer, from the city. And I think as an architect, one thing that we start to think or inspire us or force us to think about this, previously, actually, we encourage students and staff to collaborate and enjoy and interact in the campus. But in the past few months, we learned about a different methodology. I mean, some aspects of the learning has to shift to this new normal. I mean, you have to learn at home, you have to work from home. Then what's the space planning and the meaning or the space categories of the campus that are essential? I mean, if we are facing a new way of learning or a hybrid way. So one thing as a campus planner, I think that very much echoes Alex's observation. Campus primarily serve a more purpose on gathering, mass group activities and interactions, while for individual learning, or even if now we talk, I mean, in different places of the world, we can make good use of the internet and technology. So I think we have to rethink the priorities, what to play up in the campus, namely engagement, interactions, collaborations, and what are the spaces that's most relevant to this. Well, I think the opportunity is that for some traditional spaces, even classrooms, lecture theaters, etc., that in the new normal, I mean, that can partly be decentralized, partly can happen at home. So we can work something outside the campus too. So we have to think about planning on campus and outside the campus. Perhaps some space now, or traditionally we have been working or rely on everyday on campus activity space, we can remodel them into space for collaborative learning, etc., while some activities can be decentralized. And I think that could be a new way forward, I mean, to face the new normal.
Julian, your hand is raised very politely, by all means.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I mean, I think there's a real challenge, particularly for universities that aren't involved in STEM and high tech, where you can really only have those facilities in a sort of central location. For LSE, which basically are social sciences, we've got to sort of think, well, you know, what can we actually sort of make of our campus? Why would you want to come to LSE rather than do everything online? And I think we're going to have, you know, for us, London Business School, etc., we're going to have to reimagine our campuses and make them a lot more attractive because, you know, we charge very high fees, and if you can do it all online, why would you then sort of pay all those high fees? So I think there's, you know, this is forcing us to sort of think how we operate, what we do, and what we offer.
Thank you. Alex, by all means.
And sorry, this blends into some of the questions that I know that you're going to ask later, but I thought I'd get in before Julian. The other thing that Sue Mann brings up that we didn't touch on in terms of trends is the move to the digital campus. Mm-hmm. So traditional universities, or what we call in Australia the sandstone universities, have generally been a lot slower to adopt the consideration of digital space as space rather than just website or something that's an add-on or an appendix to the real teaching, face-to-face teaching. And I think that increasingly and certainly a number of universities quite sophisticated with this is the consideration of that digital space as a place that that students inhabit, and then they come to campus and it is an extension of or an extension of the same type of place. So that what does it mean to Julian's point, what does it mean to go to LSE when I can go online and I can do a course from Harvard, or I can do a course from Wharton or whatever. And so that that individual imprint of the university, both as a physical place as well as a digital place, is really important. And we, as campus planners, and I think Sim kind of touched on a little bit, we need to be thinking about both of those as parallel places that our students inhabit and staff.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Suman, I'm just going to quickly move on to the next question because I'm very conscious of time, and also on the point of time, in roughly 15 minutes or so, we're going to move to the audience Q&A. So just a quick reminder to get questions in, and also a quick reminder that we have the polling running at the bottom as well. So please feel free to respond to those questions. David, you're sat very politely listening to essentially what the clients are asking for. Now as the architect, you've got to figure out how to deliver it. And of course, deliver it possibly in a world which will be based around restricted budgets. So how do universities, how do campuses go about making their campuses work much harder if indeed in a few years' time budgets do start to be restricted?
Thank you, Jack. Apologies in advance, I'm back in the studio and we're surrounded by a lot of construction sites. So there may be some background noise. Well, I think that's a really good question, and we've thought a lot about this during lockdown. And what we've done is we've put together a multidisciplinary team of consultants to just work out how we can make estates work harder for universities. And we're calling that broadly the education design synergies, and that's a collaboration of like really specialist practices that have got a really fantastic track record in research and design of education landscapes. The core members obviously are Make, we're the lead consultant. There's Max Fordham, who's focused on sustainability, Elliot Wood, structural engineers, Gustav Porter and Bowman, who are looking at landscape, and ZZA, who are specialists in research on user experience. And we've been really using this time of lockdown to think about what the issues are and how we would address them for higher education. So almost key to that are thinking about sort of like evidence-based knowledge of user needs and preferences. So really thinking about what students, faculty and administrators want from their campus. And sort of like thinking about the flex that we can accommodate in that for changing cultural and social and economic landscapes ahead. Following on from that, we've got a really sort of like focused approach on efficient and sustainable life cycle performances in terms of how do we use resources efficiently and flexibly, and importantly, minimize carbon in the building structures and then also how they're used. And then really thinking carefully about the potential of all the available spaces that can be used on the campus at the moment that exist. I know that Alex and Julian have already touched on this in terms of like the indoor and more importantly now outdoor types of spaces. And how they can be used for social activity, circulation, and also for like greening the campus and for carbon absorption and well-being. I think then finally, it's just really, the team's really focused on like fulfilling the higher education aspirations in terms of the relevance of what we're doing for the users. And as Julian mentioned as well, representing and enhancing what the university actually means for the users. And ultimately really creating spaces that are well liked and work well for all the HE community. So that's what we've been looking at during this period, and that's why we formed that group.
Thank you very much, David. Is any sort of initial feedback to David's thoughts there, and I want to pick up on any of the sort of other comments so far before we move on to the next question? Alex?
I think that the architectural solution is going to have to be, you know, there's been a lot of writing around, first of all, the history of disease control, and a lot, and from architectural history, a lot of the motifs and configurations that we're used to came from you know, Roman or even pre-Roman ways to wash your hands before you go in a building, or, you know, do all that sort of stuff like control hygiene. And so that's one end. The other end is, how do we stop our campuses from having that clip-on kind of protection, so that you wind up with, I mean, we've all done it. We've all walked into a building and they didn't like the nice hand dryer or the nice towels in the bathroom, and they've just clipped on this horrid plastic thing in the middle, and you bump your shoulder on it, and it's just a disaster. So given that we are going to have to do a lot of these make good type of arrangements with making our campuses safe for COVID, how do we actually design our way through that kind of clip-on culture, which could be, could be really good, but is most often really horrible?
Absolutely, absolutely. Moving on, Julian, I want to come to you quickly on pick up on a comment that you mentioned at the start, and particularly in the context of specifically London or cities like London changing because of COVID, the real estate landscape possibly changing, developers maybe flipping buildings, commercial buildings to be residential buildings, what that could mean for universities. Sort of within that context of this evolving landscape, do you expect to see a greater blurring of lines in the future of estates, possibly greater collaboration with industry or sharing space with commercial tenants? You're muted again, Julian, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. So I think for city universities, that will be very important. Maybe not so much with campus-based institutions. I mean, in LSE's in the middle of London, 94% of our space is freehold. And I do anticipate a lot of commercial office space coming to the market. And I think what the pandemic has demonstrated from a property point of view is that really non-bespoke flexible space is at a premium. I think I can see universities that will, if they do have a demand for space, particularly in city centres, that they look to the ex-commercial stock, and maybe the lower floors will be devoted to academia, with the upper floors becoming sort of private or public residential. So I think that will be sort of medium to longer term change. Okay,
and David, again, sort of with your architect's hat on, answering that brief of the blurring of lines between spaces, how would you go about designing for such space?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Just to like follow on from Julian, I think what we've seen in the briefs that we've had from universities prior to COVID was a trend where they've been moving away from knowledge transfer to knowledge exchange, and understanding really what that means in terms of buildings and campuses. There's a great article on the Make Exchange website about that whole aspect. And I think also what we've seen as well from our university clients is the fact that they're looking at the local economy to like utilize skills, research and knowledge to create a real blend between those. So that's obviously like a really important part for us to consider when we're designing these places for universities. And I think just to follow on from Julian's point, I think institutions and universities are really redefining their relationships between home, campus and city. And I think that it will in the future be much more blended between working, learning and living environments. That really features like really safe, inclusive public realm that's accessible to everyone. I think a really big thing that came out of the COVID pandemic was the fact that, you know, when everything else is shut, all you have is the public realm to go out and use. And it's just going to be such an important part of our cities, on our university environments moving forward in the future.
Absolutely. And Suman, just briefly, same question to you. Julian sort of talked about it in the context of LSE and this blurring of lines. What about you? What do you envisage happening?
In university in Hong Kong, I think we are more lucky because we are substantially, in terms of the land, the capital investment for new buildings and the running cost, substantially is funded by the government. So we do not blend in or merge our boundary with commercial world. So by leasing buildings, etc., we own the land and the buildings, and we got money from government to fund it. But I think a couple of interesting observations from me as an architect is COVID-19 will push the universities also to consider what is the edge, what is the strength of the university and the campus, I mean, after the disease. And I think one aspect or a couple of items we see in the last couple of months is we've been talking about smart campus, application of robotics and AI. I mean, in the academia field and in application. But in the past months, we have to stay away from campus and sometimes work from home. So it will push the other aspect. I mean, if the campus has fewer attendance by traditionally, I mean, the frontline team or the surface team, then it may, I mean, move faster, I mean, to develop the smart campus, the IT infrastructure, or even robotics. So I think it's a juncture for the time of new innovations. Internet, now we are talking together. I mean, how often do we talk together? So it's an advancement in the internet, the infrastructure, and communication. So we can expand, I mean, the influence or the activities of campus beyond the university, beyond our campus. I mean, the boundaries blur in this aspect. I mean, it becomes global. We can disseminate the boundaries and work together. But of course, I'm not saying this is okay. Sometimes it really hurts. I mean, if you just put on your simulator and work in a virtual environment. And the second thing is the COVID actually pushed various states and even the university in thinking about research and developments. I mean, say, for example, CHK, we are good in medicine, biomedical, STEM science. So now actually, I think we are in an opposite situation, as Julian mentioned. On one hand, every city is facing with the economic crisis because things are slowing down. But to prepare for the future, actually, the state is also thinking to inject or accelerate, I mean, the development of research in biomedical, in the production of vaccines. I mean, that's also always the outcome of university research and the integration with the industries and the production. So I think if you look at the other end of, or the other end of influence of COVID, it's a push of the world society or the universities to speed up, I mean, their research in terms of health and medical aspects. In terms of architecture, one aspect I think David will echo with me is we've been talking about energy conscious green building design for a couple 20 years. But I think in CHK, we are always experimenting about wellness. I mean, design for healthy buildings. Open your windows. Previously, we so rely on building system, mechanical building surfaces. Even if you talk about smart buildings, you are talking about building surfaces. I mean, playing up the system, how the computer monitor the indoor air conditions. The key is why indoor air conditions? Why don't you open the window? So I think in doing architecture and building planning, it's like swing of the pendulum. We have to rethink about how can we make good use of natural environments. Is the mechanical environment or the IT control environment totally good? I mean, to combat or to balance the environment for our daily life. So I think that's a good initiative, I mean, for our next generation of buildings, and especially buildings on campus.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Suman. And I suppose the message there really sort of pre-COVID, post-COVID, you know, make good use of the landscape, open windows, fresh air. COVID almost irrelevant for that. And I love this concept of it's the time of new innovations. It's the time for us all to be thinking very innovatively now about the future. Conscious that we've only got 20 minutes left, and I promised that we would turn to some audience Q&As for the remaining 20 minutes. And fortunately, we have had a number of questions coming through from the audience. So thank you all very much for that. First question I'm going to pose to the panel comes from Jennifer Orford at Homes England, and it's around inclusivity for all. Jennifer asks, does COVID provide an opportunity for accessibility and neurodiversity, thinking around wayfinding, using tech and considering autism, dyspraxia, etc., and how people navigate spaces differently? Alex, are you happy to tackle that question first from Jennifer?
Yeah, I suppose that's something we were thinking about pre-COVID, and I don't know whether COVID really impacts on that, except to say that we've got a lot less money to implement anything that we look at around diversity and inclusion in the physical space. But I think that it's certainly something that we have been looking at, and as well as the normal kind of physical accessibility. And again, it will be a matter of now how we can potentially build some of those aspects into the areas that we want to focus on. So we'll be focusing on essentially landscape, efficiencies in our existing buildings, and then how we can build those elements into the focus areas for 2021.
Absolutely. Moving on to question number 2, and this question comes from Tim Brooksbank, and also I think one or two other people have also posed a similar question, and it's around lecture theatres. And Julian, I'm going to come to you with this one first. Lecture theatres, are they a thing of the past, or is there still life in the large lecture theatre raked fixed seating format?
I actually think that there will be less formal teaching space going forward. And what we'll do is we've said previously, is we'll put that space into a social learning space. I'm always a great believer that I think there will be a place for the set piece lecture, the sage on stage, as they say, but that will be a lot more limited. Plus, I think most of us are sort of going online for lectures, particularly this term and maybe this year. So we will be repurposing those spaces. We're also thinking about we won't create fixed raked lecture theatres anymore. We will maybe build them up with timber staging, but we will keep them essentially the structure flat floored, so they will increase that flexibility that I was talking about earlier.
Fantastic, thank you. On to the next question. David, I'm going to come to you with this one. I don't have a name for this question, but it's a great question. How can proper consultation and stakeholder engagement work in times of pandemic?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think basically that's a really, really hugely important tool to test and refine proposals, and to make sure that we've really captured all the user requirements and all the user concerns. And also I think adding on to that, I think we've as a practice really been investing as well in understanding user needs through post-occupancy evaluations of our completed buildings. And that's created a fantastic learning for us in terms of understanding what users are actually expecting from their buildings now, and building on that with our future designs. It really gives us a clear understanding of what works well and what we should be developing to enhance that offer, really.
Thank you, David. Suman, coming to you with the next question. I'm loving all of these Q&A questions from everyone, so thank you very much. This question comes from Anne Boddington, and it's around the master planning of campuses, so it's perfectly in your field. Is there an opportunity to consider the role of the campus as a provider of civic space and social space for obviously students, staff, but also the wider city as well? So I'm presuming from this question we're talking about the campus being not just for the university, but for the city as a whole.
Right. Thanks very much, Jack and Anne. Actually, I fully agree with Anne's idea, because say, for example, the campuses in Hong Kong, including CHK, we are an open campus. I mean, access to the campus and many of our facilities are not, especially, the open space, cafeteria, or the public space, the piazzas, the landscape, etc., etc. Even the restaurants and canteens in the colleges and the hostels, they are public can always enter the campus and play with us, work with us, enjoy our facilities. So I think planning or design for our campus is not, in our case, is not primarily to serve, the purpose of teaching and research. The campus as a whole is a place, for inclusiveness, for engagement of us with the public and with our visitors. So the campus itself is a setting for the collaborations, and I fully agree with this. So when we are planning the campus, we don't design individual buildings. It's how the building would, almost like a generator of activities, different buildings, different functions, and the planning of open space and circulation, universal access. For us, when we are doing a master plan, buildings are developed one by one. But when we are planning one building, we always have a study of the master planning, the connection with the building with a larger context, with the internal users and the external users. And I think one aspect Julian has also mentioned, is I think is very important, is in the past 10 years, we start to revamp the space either by reorganizing the space of existing buildings or building new buildings. We do a lot of collaborative and flexible space. What's the function? It can serve many functions. It can be a cafeteria, it can be a functional space, it can be a conference place, it can be a playroom. And that's what we really cherish, is that places can serve a lot of functions and people are open their mind, welcome the space, enjoy the space. And I think that's the beauty and the underlying achievements of architecture and building design. Let the people enjoy the space. They like to come in and stay there. And then, that's the synergy of the different disciplines will happen. And I think it will blur, or at the same time merge, the traditional boundary of faculties, disciplines, students, outsiders, etc., etc. So I think that's very interesting. Towards more flexible and collaborative space. And right now, I think the smart AI and internet infrastructure can help us to provide a backbone for those space, no matter how you use it. Once you have the internet backbone and the surface structure, it can serve many, many purposes, day and night.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what we enjoyed in our development in the last 10 years.
Thank you, Suman. That was a great answer. Julian, I've got another tricky one for you, I'm afraid. From Lisa Ryan, is it likely that semester-based learning will change should there be a shift towards learning without long breaks?
I think that could force a divide in universities. As you know, there are sort of research intensive universities, and then there are teaching universities, and then there's a whole load of universities in the middle that try to do both. If we shorten the breaks, then there is less time for research. And I think that's a really sort of tricky question, which I don't really feel sort of, I can just sort of pontificate about it, but I don't feel sort of qualified to answer. I think that will be a long time coming, but as I say, it might sort of, if you like, reintroduce the binary divide that we had before, where you had sort of more sort of functional universities, and then sort of more sort of the elite ones that sort of did their research as well. So, there's a lot of issues there to sort of unpack, I'm afraid.
Sure, it was a tough, tricky question I passed you there, a bit of a hospital pass. Alex, I suppose if we'd had this conversation maybe this time last year, probably the lead subject would have been the climate crisis, climate change. So sort of turning attention to that, the question come through from Carol Costello. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. Are the panelists planning ahead to adapt buildings for net zero And does the COVID crisis change from the previous strategies?
It does not change the previous strategies. We are still, particularly in Australia, and we all would have, you know, this time last year, we didn't foresee the terrible summer that we had, and with the blur of COVID, it's certainly not for the people living in those areas, but with the blur of COVID, it's been easy to forget that we are still having those terrible summers and terrible weather events throughout the year. You know, various parts of the country still in drought. So to answer the question, it doesn't change anything. The issue will be that our ability to implement, particularly in new buildings, will be slowed because of the constraint on capital. However, it does allow us, conversely, if we're focusing on leveraging our existing buildings, to see, which is much more difficult to bring those up to the relevant standards. You know, we've got one at the moment, our old quad redevelopment, that we're trying to get through passive house, but it's a, you know, 100+ year old building, and it doesn't want to, it's not behaving. But anyway, but it does allow us to some opportunities. You know, don't waste a good crisis, and how can we actually turn our attention to that adaptation in our existing, quite often heritage building stock.
Absolutely. David, another question from the audience. I don't have a name. In relation to residential design, over the last few years, we have seen a bit of a shift in residential design from universities. It's, you know, less about sort of stack 'em high and much more about the quality of the accommodation, thinking a lot more about the health and well-being of students that are occupying those spaces. As we go forward and students are possibly having to spend more time in their rooms, in their accommodation, how do you think that could change the future design of residential halls?
I think to answer that, really, it's thinking more about how the residential halls fit into the campus. And I think it's more taking more of a master plan approach. Going back to the point I made earlier about the fact that, you know, when everything is in lockdown or where everything is shut, all you do have is the public realm. And I think that's like a hugely important part of the campuses in the future, how that public realm's envisaged, making sure it's inclusive so that everyone who uses the university can actually access it safely. And making sure it's all like very well connected to the various parts of the campus, the living parts, research parts, and the working parts. I think ultimately as well with student welfare, I think a lot of the time you could end up with a lot of halls of residence which are very room focused, and there's very little space in them for social space. And I think it's thinking about the sort of like the optimum number of rooms to social space, and then how that social space needs to be designed now, in particular, thinking going forward, if we have another pandemic crisis, how that can still be used safely by the occupants to obviously ensure their well-being, really.
Absolutely. A question come through, I think specifically for Alex, but I'm going to pose it to all of you, and I'm conscious that we've only got 5 minutes left, and I'd like 2 minutes to wrap up at the end, so if you can just 30 seconds on this from all of you if possible. Has the pandemic affected your thoughts on future significant campus developments in the pipeline? Alex, to you first. Essentially, is there still cash to do the developments? People want to know.
Look, we're considering everything at the moment, and also, but less from the, you know, cash is obviously king. However, what we're really doing is COVID has also affected behaviour and travel patterns. And so is the business need, so we're focusing more on the business need for that particular, well, not for that, well, for Fisherman's Bend, which is the one that's mentioned there, but for any development, is the business need still the same? And will the business need still be the same in, say, you know, 2 to 3 years. And so that's what we're really looking at the moment.
Thank you. Julian, similar question to you, future pipeline, what does it look like? How does it change?
Well, everything's been put on hold for a year, as I've said, apart from the sort of central maintenance. We will see if we get the student numbers this year, and then I think undertake a sort of a financial review. We really only had one more sort of large set piece project in our current capital plan, so that will be sort of part of that analysis. The state strategy going on from there, actually, I would like to echo what Alex has said. We were then going to be looking very much at our existing stock and replanning and repurposing those, particularly from the standpoint of sustainability. So that would be, you know, trying to sort of turn those buildings into, I mean, I don't think we'd be able to go passive house, but we have sort of display energy certificates in the UK, and we want to turn sort of, you know, a certificate D into a certificate B or A in terms of energy efficiency. So that's the way we'd be sort of looking at it and prioritising our expenditure.
Okay, wonderful. And Suman, 60 seconds, your future pipeline.
I think we are moving ahead quite steadily. Actually, we have about a dozen new projects, but even before, they start up before the COVID-19. But in many respects, I mean, the projects are oriented towards training of doctors and nursing, public health, medicine and biomedical research, AI, smart city, robotic, and big data aspects. So actually, many academic or research initiatives of the university are towards that direction. I mean, wellness, biomedical field. And I think with the COVID-19, I hope, I mean, the government will still, I mean, commit to their plan in terms of their capital investments. Because without this, actually, it's a push. With these new projects, I think it will boost up the research and output of the university in exactly, I mean, the critical direction of well-being, Medicare, and biomedical research, AI, etc. So I hope things will be moving on, I mean, as planned in the coming 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much, Suman. As I promised, I will quickly give you the results of the poll that we have been running throughout the duration of the panel. So question number 1, budget constraints are front of mind for most now. How important will this be for new buildings? 71% say budget constraints are still only one factor amongst many other. Question number 2, how important is sustainability for new higher education design in the next decade? 95% say sustainability is crucial for new stock, and just 5% say nice to have but not essential. And question number 3, will COVID-19 health and safety measures have a long-lasting impact on the way campuses operate for the long term? 39% say that COVID-19 measures will have a long-lasting impact in the way that campuses operate. Thank you all very much for taking the time to complete those polls. The time is 9:59 in the UK, so we've got 1 minute left, so it leaves me to, first of all, thank today's panel for giving your time, for joining today's conversation, and also for working very hard on the audience Q&As there. Thank you to Make Architects and the UK's Higher Education Design Quality Forum for organising today's event and bringing together such a wonderful panel. I'd also like to thank the audience for joining. We had a great number of people tuning in to watch this, so thank you very much. And also finally, as I mentioned at the start, if you'd like to read more on many of the topics that we discussed today, you can do so in Make's Exchange series, which can be found at makearchitects.com/media/publications. It's now 10 o'clock in the UK, so from me and everyone else, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.